In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to build an awesome gaming PC for a shave over $1,500. Perfect for playing all the latest titles at 1080p and 1440p high settings, with a sleek white colour scheme, plenty of RGB, and a stunning aesthetic. Let's do this. Ebuyer is your one-stop shop for great deals on technology and gaming hardware here in the UK. If you're looking to build a new PC this year or just supercharge your setup with a new monitor or some peripherals, head over to ebuyer.com and check out their wide range of great deals. What's more, they've also got some great deals on pre-built PCs from AlphaSync, awesome systems that are ready to ship. Check them out at the link in the description below. As with all the builds here on the channel, I'm going to start by walking you through the components and how to put them together, and look at performance a little bit later. The two most important components in any build, and a great starting point, is to look at your GPU and CPU first of all. These are the combo that really rely on one another and set the groundwork for how the rest of the build is set to perform. This right here is the RTX 3070 Ti from Nvidia. This particular card is the Founders Edition, an aesthetic of GPU I absolutely love, and something that just adds that little bit of different flair in a build. You don't get a graphics card that looks quite like this one, and frankly, I think they've done an awesome job of it. Leaks and rumours at the moment also show 4000 cards to look pretty similar, which I'd be fairly happy with. I've always been a fan of the Founders designs ever since they launched with 20 series, and this is no exception. The cooling solution though not only looks good but performs well. This is a very well equipped card as far as VRAM goes, with heaps of CUDA cores for raw render power and plenty of performance. I always said the 3070 performed too close to the 3060 Ti to be mega worth it, and the 70 Ti solves that problem nicely. Plus, with next gen GPUs most definitely on the horizon, there's some great deals to be had on a card like this now, massive sums of money to be saved, which I'm sure will not be seen on the next gen of cards for some time. Paired up with the Intel Core i7-12700K, and this build means business. With Intel's performance and efficiency cores, and well over 4 GHz for your clock speed, closer to 5 GHz really, this is a chip that delivers incredible instruction per clock performance. That's your sort of single thread side of things, and then also your multi-core across all the cores and all the threads this thing has to offer. With new CPUs from AMD and maybe Intel even on the horizon, this is not a bad choice for this build, and once again there's some great CPU deals to be had out there at the moment. I'll be installing the CPU into the Asus ROG Strix Z690A gaming Wi-Fi. I actually went and picked up this board for one very specific reason. Not only does it sit on the Z690 chipset, allowing us to overclock the CPU and giving us all the great features that you would find on that high-end design, we've actually done an article comparing the B660 and Z690 chipsets, which is well worth a read, and looks at what the differences are between the two in more detail. That all-important reason though is that it actually supports DDR4 memory. Now, DDR4 is a lot cheaper than DDR5, and providing you get a decent DDR4 kit, you can not only save yourself some serious cash, but you don't really miss out on much performance either. The board also has these nice white heatsink designs and plenty of Asus specific features, like a button to release your PCI slot on your graphics card. That's a pretty cool feature, and all in all, it's a great board for overclocking, general use with good connectivity and all that jazz. Perhaps most importantly though, it also supports our latest Intel 12th gen processor for pretty cutting edge performance, aside from what AMD have got to offer with Ryzen 7000, which is likely to be more pricey because it requires DDR5 memory. This is about as good as you can get at the moment. Into the board, I'll also be adding a 16 gig RAM kit. This is Corsair's Vengeance RGB RT kit. Now, in theory, 16 versus 32 gigs in this build won't make a massive difference, but I would definitely consider a 32 gigabyte kit if you've got the extra cash. RAM is easily installed into any build with the second and fourth slots. To achieve that higher capacity, you could either pick up 16 gig DIMMs instead, or 4 of these 8 gig DIMMs to populate all the slots on the motherboard. Is it going to make a huge difference? The latter is just going to be worse for future upgradability. Finally, the last component to pop into the motherboard is the storage. Now, storage is a pretty contentious point in any build, and the Seagate FireCuda 530 is hopefully going to answer our questions for this system. The only slight slight change to this one is that I'd recommend the 1TB drive for some significant cost savings and to help keep this build in budget. And that's the one I'll link with all the other components down in the description below. Regular viewers of the channel will know what's coming next. We need to ditch the regular screwdriver for a much smaller, teeny tiny variant, which we'll be using to uninstall this very top little heatsink heat spreader that actually covers up our M.2 SSD drive. We can slide the FireCuda 530 in, a great Gen 4 PCIe drive with speeds in the region of about 7 gigabytes per second. It's widely regarded not just by us but by much of the industry as being one of the best Gen 4 SSDs out there, if not the best you can buy right now. If you are after a little bit more mass storage, I would recommend picking up a cheap SATA SSD or hard drive in addition to the storage in this build, but stick with that super fast NVMe to make sure you're avoiding bottlenecks. New graphics cards like the 3070, 3080, 3090 do require fast storage, and the next gen of GPUs is certainly going to be no different. Having to make this whole system pretty next gen GPU ready. Talking of being ready for things, I think we're ready to move the whole thing into the case. There is one optional stage you can do now, and that's a little bit of CPU cooler prep. I'm going to do that as it will make our life easier by just adding some mounting hardware around the CPU from our Cooler Master box. I'll jump into more detail on the cooler shortly, but doing the intricate tricky part on the board now makes your life a bit easier later. And once that's done, we can go ahead and take a look at the case. This is the Cooler Master Masterbox 520, but not necessarily as you know it. As far as I'm aware, this is kind of like a whole redesign, refresh of the 520. There's a white edition, there's a black edition. We've got both in the office and we will be reviewing both in detail on the website very soon, so keep your eyes peeled for that one. For now though, I need some scissors and we need to go and take a look at this brand new chassis. Often in our builds we will reuse components we've already had before. There are only so many cases in the world and we've had hands-on time with a lot of them, so it's always exciting when something a bit new comes in, new and shiny. First impressions are pretty good. There's a few weird things I noticed off the bat. These rear side panel things are in a grey to match the tempered glass panel, which is a bit odd. I mean, it's not terrible by any means, but I think I'd rather they have been white, to be honest with you. Same if you look on the inside, the grommets I can kind of live with, but this side panel, they're not captive thumb screws. I'm not sure about this Cooler Master because if you can see here, there is a black bracket on the top and on the bottom in terms of the frame for the panel, but all of the grey down either side of this panel is actually just a sticker. But my point is, it's still glass. It's just a fake. This could be clear, and I think frankly this is all a little bit too thick around the edge for my liking. But I mean, I will hold off my severe criticisms, or at least it maybe could have been white. That might have made a little bit more sense. It's only a really small thing and we're being very pedantic, but I wonder what size hole the USB-C port was originally machined. No spoilers for guessing that was once another USB-A. I mean, we could have had another cutout, kept two USB 3s, but it's not a major issue. I'm glad to see USB-C full stop. I do like the front panel. I like the design. There's a bit of mesh, a bit of glass. I'm generally a bit of a fan. I like it so far. I just think there's a couple of colorway options that could have been made differently, but if I'm being honest with you, that's always the way when it comes to a white case. In my mind, if you're going to do a white case, it's got to be all white, like the Corsair 4000D QL edition. I think that's the name of it.
Yes, James is correct.
But so far, this isn't bad. Even stuff like our fan cables and fan headers are white, and that's often something that gets overlooked by other manufacturers. So a solid 7.5, 8 out of 10 so far. There is something low-key kind of satisfying about installing a motherboard, especially when it's an ATX board in an ATX case like this one, and the colour scheme matches so well. All the standoffs are in the right place, just super convenient, and it works off the bat. The only minorly irritating thing about this process is when you drop a screw and you've got to like fiddle with your magnetic screwdriver to try and retrieve it, or worse, shake the case because you didn't buy a magnetic screwdriver. But otherwise, screw motherboard in, 9 holes on the motherboard, 9 screws in total, and that'll stop it from going anywhere anytime soon. With the motherboard in then, we can go ahead and pop in the cooler. Now I've picked up Cooler Master's PL360 Flux. Unfortunately, I haven't got a white version, but I am going to put the radiator at the front of the case, and with the black front panel and white fans at the front, I'm hoping this shouldn't look particularly out of place. I think I'm also going to add in the fans with the radiator at the back for a push-pull config, providing we've got room with our power supply shield. We do, and in theory that should also help with airflow. Our Founders Edition graphics card is only pretty short, so there's plenty of room in here for a push-pull rad, and arguably without one the whole thing might look a bit empty. I need to take off the front panel first of all, not sure quite how we do that. like that, I suppose. And then, as much of a pain in the ass as this sounds, I've got to actually take out these front fans, which are screwed in from the back side, before popping a new longer screw through them and adding the radiator in for good measure. Before you add the rad in, make sure your rear fans, your push-pull, the pull fans, are at the back already. Putting these in when the radiator's in is going to be far too tight. We also just need to swap out the brackets for the cooler with these ones. These are the ones in our Intel bag, and the ones on our standard are AMD for me. To swap these out, and then you can pop it on the cooler, fasten it down with 4 thumb screws, tighten them with a screwdriver, and of course, remember the thermal paste. Otherwise though, the cooler's in, and so far, looking good. Okay then, so we can now go ahead and pop in the graphics card. I did talk in a bit of detail earlier about the 3070 Ti, and we will be looking at performance benchmarks for it very shortly. We do need to remove a couple of PCI lanes at the rear of the case, but to do that, we're first going to hover the GPU over to figure out which exactly need to be taken out. If you look here, there's 2. The second and the third slots of all of them are the ones we need to remove, and we'll be using the same screws to secure the graphics card back in. Click the graphics card into place. Here we go. Not very satisfying click today, but it's in nonetheless, and screw it down. Right then, with the graphics card in, we can wrap things up with our last component, the power supply. Now, in keeping with the Cooler Master theme, I would have preferred to have gone for a Cooler Master power supply, but I didn't have any white ones in, so I will be searching their site and placing one on order for the next build that we do in this case, providing the results in terms of thermals and stuff are good, but I think they're going to be, and I'm liking the look of it all so far. This is Corsair's fully modular CX750F. As with many of the components featured on the channel, we have got full written reviews that we've put blood, sweat and tears into it. That's a slight exaggeration, but if you'd like to learn about this power supply, about what makes it such a good choice, we have got a full write-up. Covers features like the RGB included on the power supply and all that jazz. We're going to plug up a few different cables. We've got a CPU power connection, the GPU power cable is next, and our motherboard power connection is already onto the power supply. Unfortunately, we will have to use a rather ugly dongle for our graphics card because it's got that next-gen PCIe 5.0 power connection that hopefully new PSUs should start to adopt in the coming weeks, months, I don't know. Hopefully we'll start to see that filtering through properly to more budget-oriented units. You can already find expensive ones with it, but what about these cheaper power supplies for the mass market? Why are you not going in? There we are. In we go. Screw your power supply in with a fan up or down orientation. Doesn't really matter because we've got vents on both sides. And then plug up your CPU, motherboard, and GPU power connections via a dongle in this instance to get the whole build powered up and ready to go. I have thrown in some custom sleeve PSU extensions for the CPU and motherboard, but there's no point for the GPU because we've got that dongle to contend with. And then we're ready to boot the thing up and see just how it performs, working through a range of titles at 1080 and 1440p. In F1 2022, our first title today, at 1440p ultra settings, we achieved around 180 frames per second on average. 90 and 99th percentile results were strong too, with all the data captured using MSI Afterburner's Riva Tuner and NVIDIA FrameView. In the latest Spiderman title, where we tested at 1440p high once again, with DLSS enabled, the results were, again, very impressive. 94 frames per second on average for the 90 and 99th percentile results created a really enjoyable and playable experience that looked awesome, swinging through the buildings, and is just something that little bit different. Battlefield 2042 was also very good. Here at 1440p high, we got just a shave under 90 frames per second, 89 on average, with gameplay that looked buttery smooth. You do, of course, have access to both DLSS and ray tracing in Battlefield 2042 to give the game that nice upper hand when it comes to those beautiful visuals. Apex Legends gave us similarly fantastic results. 1440p high, we topped out at 139 frames per second. The game looked once again fantastic, great sort of esports level frame rates, aiming for that 150 FPS mark across the board, giving us a really playable and competitive gaming experience. A game where frame rate certainly wasn't a problem was Valorant, where at 1440p high settings, we achieved one of the most astonishing frame rates we've ever gotten in a build. 460 frames per second on average. Oh my goodness. 90 and 99th percentile results were strong. I don't even think you could buy a monitor with a high enough refresh rate to see this many frames per second. Incredibly impressive in Valorant, and the game looked frankly awesome. Finally, to wrap things up, we also tested out Fortnite at 1080p competitive settings. Everything tuned down to low except the render distance, which is set to far, to give you the most competitive gaming experience with the best possible frame rates. 205 FPS was the fruit of our settings labour, with a really strong average frame rate here. The 90 and 99th percentile results were great, and the game even visually looks amazing at 1080p low settings. Far better than other titles when you tune those settings down to this degree. And with that, that wraps it up for the benchmarks and the wider build video. If you enjoyed it, get subscribed to see more from us. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.